As some of you guys know, I've shared this before, I spent 4 months of my life in a country called Uganda, which is in East Africa, on the continent of Africa. So it was part of a study abroad program. I went there for 4 months during my time at college, and I lived with a family there. And I have a lot of stories I could tell, like lots of stories about pooping in holes, bathing out of like a little bucket thing where you had to like splash it up, and it was really hard to like, it was just hard. It wasn't too easy. Lots of weird stories from Uganda, but tonight I'm gonna share a story that came towards the end of my trip. The group that I was with, we traveled to a country that is right next door. Anyone know any countries that surround Uganda? Huh? Okay. I think I heard it. No. But good guess. Good guess. No, I think someone said Kenya. I'm pretty sure Kenya is right. But we went to a country called Rwanda. Say Rwanda. All right. And this, listen up, y'all. Not Wakanda. But Rwanda. So, anybody know anything about Rwanda? Okay. Billy. Yes, there was a genocide. Anybody know what the word genocide means?
Mass murder.
Yeah, like a mass murder of a certain people group. So, y'all, come here, come back. Come back. I don't have you tonight, and I really want to make sure we're here. Okay, so Rwanda suffered a really horrible genocide at one point in time. It was actually just back in 1994, which for me doesn't feel that long ago because I was born in 1990, so I was alive when this happened. Sometimes you hear these crazy things where a ton of people are killed, or maybe there's some wild war and you think, oh, that was forever ago. But this took place just in 1994. There was two people groups at the time in Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis, and for some reason, the Hutus, who were in power, decided that the Tutsis were a race that were inferior and that all of them should be killed. And so in the span of 4 months, over 800,000 people were killed. In 4 months, from April to June of 1994. And we went to Rwanda as a group at the end of our time together, and we walked through a bunch of museums that taught us about what the genocide looked like, that gave us stories. We went to a church that was just shot up with bullet holes everywhere because there were people hiding in the church trying not to be killed. They would stop people at these traffic blocks, essentially. So people would be driving their cars or trying to flee the country or trying to get somewhere, and they would stop them, and they would make them show their identification cards that would say if you were a Hutu or a Tutsi, and if you're a Tutsi, they would just kill them on the spot. I'm not even capable of describing the mass killing that happened. When we went there and saw that devastation, we were just weeping because I've never even really heard of something that bad in my entire life. In 4 months, 800,000 people, not just killed, but murdered, were murdered by other people. So there was a lot of rural communities that would have Hutu and Tutsis mixed in. And so sometimes neighbors would be killing neighbors, literally, because they knew who they were. So they would walk next door and kill somebody. It's insane, and it almost sounds like I'm describing a movie, but it wasn't a movie, it was real life. 20 years ago, this happened. And so we're walking through all of these museums and these monuments, and it is just heartbreaking. I almost couldn't fathom what I was taking in. But the part that I really want to share with you is we talked to an organization that's called CARSA in Rwanda, and their job was to keep reconciliation going. So we're 20 years out from the genocide, but their job is to continue pushing for reconciliation between people groups. And we sat and we listened as a woman sat next to this man. I assumed they were related or something. I don't know. They were speaking some English, but there's also a translator. And so we sat and listened as this woman talked about how the guy next to her had killed her father, and she had watched it happen. And we're sitting in a classroom, essentially. And this woman is telling her story, and she's talking about the heartache and the pain and what it was like. And the man is just sitting there. He's just next to her, just sitting there. And she continues on in her story and talks about how she forgave this man who she watched kill her father. And how now they sit next to each other, they go to these things and talk about reconciliation. They talk about how forgiveness is possible, how even when someone hurts you as badly as a person can hurt you, there is a chance for forgiveness. There's a chance for reconciliation. And honestly, guys, this blew my mind. I was 21 at the time, so I'd seen some stuff in life. I wasn't 12, I was 21, and this was blowing my mind. And some questions ran through my head. I was like, is this woman dumb? Is she dumb for doing this? Doesn't that seem crazy that she would forgive this guy? Is she dumb? Is she naive? Does she have something that I don't have because I don't know that it would be possible for me to do that? Why is this woman forgiving this man? Why did she do that? And I left there having that question. Why on earth would you do that? He doesn't deserve necessarily your forgiveness for what he did, so why would you do that? Another story that kind of boggles my mind, and it's just as extreme, comes from our scriptures when we look at Jesus on the cross and his whole march to his death. Okay, so a lot of us know this story. Don't tune me out just because you know it. So Jesus is marching to his death. He's carrying the cross. He's been whipped. He's got the crown of thorns. He's bleeding. He's hurting. And they hang him on the cross. And there's this crazy scene happening around him. All of these people who once loved him, essentially, now want him to be killed in the most horrific way possible. And we're going to pick up in Luke here, if you can put that on the screen. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. They divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers sneered at him. They said, "He saved others, let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the king of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." Okay, so let's take in this picture real quick. Jesus is hanging on the cross, dying. People are casting lots and trying to take his clothes. People are hurling insults at him why aren't you saving yourself? If you're God, what are you doing? This is the worst picture that you could come up with of someone's life. This sucks. This moment in his life is hard. And then he says this, "Forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they're doing." As he is on the cross, as he's being beaten and killed, and people are taking what's left of him, his clothes, literally taking them, he says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they're doing." So some of the same questions wrestle in my mind, and maybe they do for you too. Why is he doing that? What makes a person who is dying and hurting reach out to another person and say, "Please, forgive them. Forgive these people who are hurting me"? It almost doesn't make sense, right? That in our human nature, we want to hold on to things. We want to be angry. We want people to get what they deserve. So this doesn't really make sense. So some of those same questions come back. Was Jesus naive? Was he stupid? Did he have something that we didn't have? Why is he doing what he is doing? Before we go on any further, I want you to take your journals. And I want you to identify 1 to 2 people in your life that you feel like you need to forgive. This could be any sort of relationship. This could be a family relationship, a parent or a sibling, a friend that has hurt you in the past. Maybe a stranger hurt you in some sort of way, and you don't really even know who they are, but they hurt you. Maybe you have a significant other and something happened there. I want you to really think about this, and I want you to identify the 1 or 2 people that you need to forgive the most, the hardest situations in your life that you need to forgive. So take a minute and do that. Okay, and let me say now, like, it's okay whatever yours is. It's okay if you've been hurt really badly. It's okay if you haven't. If you feel like, well, I'm writing down someone or something that seems kind of small in comparison to what you're talking about or in comparison to my neighbor, that's okay. Hurt is hurt and forgiveness is forgiveness. So just identify the people that you need to forgive. So that question still stands though, like, why do we forgive people? So the first reason that we do is because we watched Jesus do it. And honestly, Jesus' situation was worse than yours. Like, I don't even know all your situations, but Jesus' was worse. And he chose to forgive the people who were actively hurting him. So the first reason we do it is because Jesus modeled it, and we are called to model our lives after Jesus' life. The second reason that we do it is because Jesus told us to. Many of you guys know the passage 70 times 7, like how much are we supposed to forgive? And essentially he's calling us to forgive over and over and over again. So this is like a very clear commandment that we have from Jesus. You don't have to interpret it, you don't have to read into it. Jesus literally says we're supposed to forgive over and over and over again. The third reason, and this might be our most important reason tonight, is because in forgiveness, we break cycles of sin. When we forgive, we break cycles of sin. We break the cycle of anger, the cycle of resentment, of bitterness, of the vices that we run to when we're sad. We break those cycles when we choose and have the freedom to forgive. There's a picture that I want to show you guys. This is kind of like two cycles that we have the chance to enter into. So over on the left, you have the revenge cycle. So start here in the square. You got hurt, harm, loss. Something has happened to you that was difficult. Then you go to pain, because that's what happens when we are hurt. And this is where you have the choice. Okay? You can choose to heal, and then you start walking through the process of forgiveness, which we're going to tackle in a second, or you choose to harm. You reject that you share humanity with the person that hurt you. There's revenge, retaliation, payback, violence, cruelty, which just ends in more hurt and harm and loss, which goes to pain, which goes to choosing to harm. There's this cycle that happens when we don't forgive that just keeps repeating itself. Hurt people hurt people. It just keeps going. But there's something critical that happens at this crossroad after our pain. We have two choices, and maybe you don't think that you do because you've been hurt really bad. You have a choice. And so when we choose to heal, we start ourselves on the path to forgiveness. And we're going to dive into that a little bit. So there's this fourfold process that I want to talk about with you guys, and it's created by a guy named Desmond Tutu. Anybody know that name? Okay, a few of us. Anybody know where he's from, what he did, anything? It's cool. Okay, so Desmond Tutu was an archbishop in South Africa during the time of apartheid, and maybe you've heard of apartheid. Essentially, in South Africa, there was just systems of racism in place that were more extreme, really, than anywhere else that we've seen. And so from the top down, the white people in South Africa were holding power over other races. Even though that they were the minority in South Africa, they held all sorts of power. So there were people in prison, there were people killed, people couldn't have interracial relationships. It was crazy. And again, apartheid only ended in 1994. So this isn't something that we're talking like, 1800, something crazy happened. Like, just recently, about 20 years ago, this was going on in South Africa. And Desmond Tutu, along with Nelson Mandela, all sorts of people were active in getting apartheid turned over, essentially. And now they have a new system of government in South Africa. So he develops this fourfold process, and he walks through it with his daughter. And there's a book that if you leave this place and you want to know more about this topic, then come to me. I'll get you a copy of the book. It was insane. I skimmed it. I read some chapters, and I was floored. So the book is just called the Book of Forgiveness, and it teaches us how to forgive. So his daughter tells us this story of how during the time of apartheid, she came home and she found her housekeeper, live-in nanny, the woman that took care of her kids and took care of her house, just beaten and killed inside of her own house, just because of racism. And so she walks through this book and all parts of this fourfold process of what it looked like for her to forgive the person who did this, who violated her home and violated her friend. And so this is the process that I want to share with us tonight. And as we're doing that, I want you to think about a name or two that you have written down. And I want you to put yourself inside of this process. What step are you at? Maybe you haven't even started step 1. That's okay. Like, there's no judgment in this room. But I want you to map out where you are in this process of forgiveness tonight. Okay, so the first step that we have is tell the story. So in this step, what Desmond walks through is you can't really let freedom and forgiveness enter your heart if there is secrets that lie under the surface. And many of us have secrets, especially regarding our hurt, because that stuff is hard to bring up. When you're hurt, especially deeply or intimately, you don't really know how to bring that up to your friend at lunchtime. Okay, you don't know how to bring it up to the person who's hurt you. So that stuff starts to kind of sit in our bellies, and it festers sometimes, and it just turns into a big secret. So some of us in this room probably have hurt that we've never even spoken about because we're scared to, or we're just hurt so badly that we don't know how to talk about it. So in this step, basically it's just getting it out. Telling someone your story, telling the facts of what happened to you. And in the book, as she recounts the details, it's crazy. She talks about what happened that day when she woke up and she took her kids to school, and she came back and she felt like something was wrong, and she went to the room and she saw this. And so she talks about all of the details of what happened when she was hurt, what took place that day. And that's important. It's important for us as people, it's important for the people you're talking to, and it's important for the person that has hurt you to know what has happened. There's a quote that from the book that I'd like to read. It says, "When we lock our stories inside us, the initial injury is often compounded. If I tuck my secrets and my stories away in shame or fear or silence, then I am bound to my victimhood and my trauma." So it festers inside of us when we don't get the chance to tell our stories. So that's step number 1. So maybe you're already like, okay, well, I haven't even gone there, so I guess I haven't started the process. Or maybe you're thinking about that person's name or the hurt that you've been through, and you're like, I've talked about this with somebody, and so I think I've moved past this stage. Step number 2 is name the hurt. Now this kind of sounds similar to the one before it, but it's different because it's one thing to say, okay, this is what happened when I was hurt. So she talks about what she did that day, what went down, and what she encountered. But naming your hurt is about bringing the emotions to the surface. So when she names her hurt, obviously there's pain because her friend was killed. I mean, there's tons of grief that enters into that. But she also says she felt like her house was stolen from her because now all of a sudden her house wasn't safe. She doesn't want to go into that room anymore. She doesn't want to raise her kids in that house because her house has been violated. So she's unearthing emotions that maybe at first glance you wouldn't find or you wouldn't see, but they're emotions that happened because of what happened to her. So in this step, it's not just about getting out the details of what took place, but about figuring out what hurt you. What is the emotional baggage that you carry around because of what took place and what has hurt you? There's some research about the human brain, and our brains are a crazy place. But this research talks about how physical pain and emotional pain accesses the same place in your brain. So your brain doesn't actually distinguish between, oh, I tripped and I hurt myself, and that person hurt my heart. They access the same places in your brain. So when people say sticks and stones break your bones, words will never hurt, it's just not true. Sticks and stones will break your bones, that's true, but words are also gonna hurt you in the same place in your brain that those sticks and stones hurt. And that's fascinating because I think we don't deal with our emotional or our mental pain as regularly as we would when we get hurt. I once flipped off my bike. You better believe right away I was screaming for help. I was like, someone needs to go find my mom immediately, and I think all of my bones are broken, so someone's got to do something. It was immediate because I was in pain, and that's a natural thing to ask for help for. But those other things that have happened to me, those other people that have hurt me, I let them sit for a lot longer, even though they are causing a similar type of hurt inside my brain. So in this step, we need to name those things. We need to talk about our emotions. We need to understand what things actually have been stolen from us. The next step is to grant forgiveness. Now, when I first read this, I was like, well, that seems like kind of cheap. Like, what do you mean grant forgiveness? Like, isn't that what we're trying to do in this whole process? And a lot of what he writes about is that forgiveness is a choice. And believe me, that frustrates me probably as much as it frustrates anyone in this room. Because I want to hold on to that and say like, well, not really, because you don't know my story and you don't know what I've been through. And so if you knew, then you would recognize that I can't just choose to forgive. It's a lot more complex than that in my brain. But the truth is, forgiveness is a choice. This step, you can choose to take it, or you can choose to keep going on the path of pain. And the reason that we do this, the reason that we step into this forgiveness step, is that we don't just end up in a constant loop between step 1 and step 2. Because that can be really easy. Once you've shared something, it can get really easy to start talking about it. Okay, this has hurt me, this has hurt me, this has hurt me. Well, I am this way because I was hurt back here. And I do this because I was hurt. And then we live in this stage where we're constantly talking about our problems and we talk about ways that we've been hurt, but we never get to move past it. Because we never make the choice to forgive. There's a little poem type thing that I want to read over us because as soon as I saw it, I was like, whew, okay, I could just read that and walk off. I don't even need to speak. But this to me is what it looks like to choose to forgive, these types of declarations. So let's read this. I will forgive you. These words are so small, but there is a universe hidden in them. When I forgive you, all those cords of resentment, pain, and sadness that had wrapped themselves around my heart will be gone. When I forgive you, you will no longer define me. You measured me and assessed me and decided that you could hurt me. I didn't count. But I will forgive you because I do count. I do matter. I am bigger than the image you have of me. I am stronger. I am more beautiful, and I am infinitely more precious than you thought me. I will forgive you. My forgiveness is not a gift that I am giving to you. When I forgive you, my forgiveness will be a gift that gives itself to me. There's a lot of reasons that we are called to choose to forgive. We want to model Jesus. We want to do what he asks of us. We want to break ourselves out of these cycles of sin. And there's also some practical things that happen when we choose to forgive. I was reading up on some research that was done and it listed like all of these physical symptoms. Can you go to that, Alexa? I think it's up earlier. So these are some things that forgiveness can do. It can reduce depression. It can increase hopefulness. It can decrease anger, improve spiritual connection, increase emotional self-confidence. And on the flip side, failing to forgive can be a risk factor for heart disease, high blood pressure, anxiety, depression, insomnia, ulcers, migraines, backaches, heart attacks. Now, I'm not saying like because you choose not to forgive, these things are going to happen to you. Or if something like this happens to you, it's solely because you held on to that bitterness. That's not what I'm saying. But there is research that links these things together. It's not just our emotions that affect our emotions. Sometimes our emotional state can affect our physical bodies. So some of us are holding on to bitterness and resentment, and it's causing some of these things in us. Or it's down the line going to cause some of these things in us. So maybe the whole emotional, spiritual reason to forgive isn't enough for you. I'm not sure what you guys are thinking right now. But check out some of these things. Like, it is also good for our health, for our well-being, for our daily life to choose to forgive. There's this quote that's floated around, and it's like been attributed to a bunch of different people, but it says holding on to anger or resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Have you heard that before? Has anybody heard that? Okay, there's a couple different people that they say might have said that, but holding on to anger or resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. It doesn't accomplish anything for you to remain in that place. Now, I want to make a couple things pretty clear before we even go on to the next step. Forgiveness is not a couple different things. Forgiveness is not easy. So I'm not trying to say that because I talked about something for 20 minutes, then like you go home and forgive and your whole life is different and better and it's never gonna look hard again. Not what I'm saying. Forgiveness is not easy. It's not quick. Forgiveness is not anti-justice, because sometimes that's the argument we put up. It's like, well, that person deserves X, Y, and Z. Forgiveness is not anti-justice. Forgiveness is God's justice. So when we choose to forgive, we set ourselves on a path to healing and wholeness and forgiveness. So even right now, just do a quick mental check with the person that you wrote down, or the two things or situations that you wrote down. We've walked through 3 steps so far, and I want you to think about, where do you find yourself in that? Have you talked about what happened to you, how you've been hurt, whether small or large? Have you talked about it? Have you named the emotions that come with that and unearthed some of the hard, unpretty things? Have you chosen to forgive? Have you made the active choice that you are setting yourself on this path of forgiveness? Or maybe you have done all those things and you're in this last stage, because it doesn't end when we choose to forgive. Step number 4 is renew or release the relationship. So choosing to forgive someone actually isn't the end of the process. There's still one thing that we need to work on. And what Desmond writes in his book, and what I think the Lord speaks to us as well, is that our goal in life is to reconcile with the people who have hurt us. That is our goal. So the renewal is the goal. And that's hard. Because maybe you're asking like, well, I don't want any sort of relationship with that person. I have no desire to have any relationship with that person. Renewal is the goal because that person is a person made in the image of God, just like you are. And by cutting them out of your life, you're reducing their humanity and saying they're not worth it, that God doesn't have any sort of plan for them, and you're leaving them behind. I also want to be really clear that renewing a relationship doesn't look like getting back what you might have had. So if you were hurt by a parent, or hurt by a friend, or hurt by a significant other, renewing the relationship doesn't mean, oh, well, if we were dating, then I don't know, Cody's saying date him again, I guess, like, even though he hurt me, that's what I'm hearing. Or this person really hurt me, they were a terrible father or mother to me, but like, I guess I'm supposed to go back and run into their arms and pretend like I'm 6 again, like that's my goal, I guess. That's not what I'm saying. Sometimes renewing a relationship looks like having one conversation with the person at one point in your life. Sometimes it means like getting something back that you once lost. So maybe you stop hating the person and you can be around them again. Maybe there is a friendship that comes back. For some of us, the things that have hurt us are small enough that we can rebuild and restore and reconcile that relationship. If there is a person on your list who has like physically hurt you or has done some sort of harm that is going to recur, obviously I am not saying to go back into that relationship. And that's what Desmond actually writes. He says, renewal is the goal unless there's danger involved. Renewal is the goal unless danger is involved. And so we need to decide, okay, what does a renewal look like? And can I get there? Or do I need to release this relationship? And when you release it, it means you don't hold on to that anymore. That person doesn't define you anymore. They don't get to have any power over you anymore because you have released it and decided that's just not happening ever again. And so we find ourselves at a crossroads when we enter into this stage. 2 quick stories. The first comes from high school for me. I had a friend named Sasha and a friend named Mickey. And Sasha and Mickey were like best friends, had been friends for a really long time. They were 2 of my neighbors. So like we'd get off the bus and we would hang out every single day. We would just like walk to each other's houses and eat all of our parents' taquitos. It was like the best thing in the world. And so we'd hang out every single day until something happened. I don't know, because I was a high school boy and didn't get it. Something happened and Sasha and Mickey all of a sudden weren't friends anymore. They hated each other, and it happened in like a day. I was like, okay, weird, because where do I get my taquitos now? So I was very confused, and this lasted for a long time, and eventually they started telling me kind of what happened, and there was some real hurt there, but I kept thinking like, man, these people have been friends for so long, and now all of a sudden things are like cut off and not happening anymore. Like, I feel like something could reconcile. I'm an outside person, so maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like something could reconcile. Well, don't you know, a couple months later, Sasha and Mickey went out to coffee one time, and we're friends again. Because so much of the pain and the hurt that had taken place was because of miscommunication, was because of distance, was because when you don't see someone for a long time, you start to dehumanize them and you just make them your problem. So they did this, they did this, they did this, they did this. Then you see them face to face and you remember, that's a person. That's someone that I actually care about. And so they had one conversation and their relationship started to become reconciled. A much lengthier example, and this is one that I've talked about before, but my person that I would write down first is my brother Junior. He's my older adopted brother. There's just stuff in our past where he hurt me in a bunch of different ways. And I could probably still be at the unearthing stage if I really thought about it. But I think I've done most of these stages with Junior, but it has taken me like 10 years probably to work through that process. Because I think I tried to forgive sometimes, but I let the resentment cycle me back to here and here and here and here, and I just kept talking about it, and I just kept saying, he did this, and I messed up because of this, and blah, 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 blah. And eventually I got to a place that's like, man, you're gonna be stuck here forever unless you choose to actually forgive this person. And so that's just like two quick examples from my life. There are a million other facets of relationship that you could have written down or could be thinking about right now. So I don't know what your story is or what you're thinking about. But what I do know is this is a healthy and good process, and one that we are called to by our Heavenly Father. He asks us to forgive over and over and over again. And I understand that it's hard. Really, truly understand that it's hard because it felt impossible to me at one point. And it's not like rainbows and butterflies with Junior either. Like, I see him at Christmas and now I don't hate him. And that's kind of the epilogue of my story there. But for me, that means I've worked through some forgiveness because I couldn't be around. I just hated him. There was this ugly part of my heart that was just totally directed at him. And now we hang out and I'm like, okay, I don't really like him that much, but he's my brother, so that's where we're at. And ideally that gets stronger and stronger as I continue to choose to forgive. But that is where I'm at. And so I want you guys to be thinking about that for the people on your list. We're gonna have time tonight because I don't want this to be head knowledge or even just unresolved heart knowledge. I want us to actually step through some of these stages together. And so, kind of like we did with our Four Corners game, we've got 4 corners of the room devoted to those steps. So step 1 here is called Tell the Story. You can see that on the wall. In the back, that step is Name the Hurt. Over here, step 3 is Granting Forgiveness. And over here is renewing or releasing the relationship. So we're gonna take probably the rest of time tonight, and I want us to place ourselves physically in the place where you find yourself in this relationship. So the whole room is open, but I really want you to kind of head to one of those places. If leaders can start doing that now. So both of these stations and stages deal with talking something out, and I want us to do that in the healthiest place that I know, which is this group of people. You don't often have 20 stellar adults who care about you and want to listen to you. And so if you have something that you just never talked about or a story that you just never told, come talk to a leader and tell your story. They're just gonna listen to you. If you talked about it with somebody, but you want to start unearthing some stuff, some emotions that maybe you just didn't even know were there, head over there and talk to someone. The forgiveness stage, we've got some of those poems, and I think for some of us, maybe tonight's a night we make a choice to forgive, and so maybe you read that poem over yourself, and you take it with you, or you mark it with a date, or you do something and put it in your journal, I don't know, to kind of mark that, like, this is your declaration of choice of forgiveness. And maybe you want to kind of figure out, what do I do next? What's my next step? I think I actually have forgiven this person, so what do I do? So we've got those places in the room. You're also welcome to have conversations with each other. I know that there are some strong friendships in here and some strong trust built between people. So if there's something that you want to bring to a friend, you can bring that to a friend. You don't have to talk to a leader. But I want to encourage you that like these leaders genuinely care. I do not pay them anything to be here. And they're here a lot. So they care about you. So whether it's a leader at that particular station or somebody else in the room, like tonight we've got 35 minutes, it's a free night, so grab somebody that you trust, head over somewhere and have a conversation and see where you are in this whole cycle. Are there any questions?
Just to clarify, if the leader's in a different corner, you can go back and remove.
Yeah, you can, yes. Grab whomever you like. If you've got somebody that you really trust or that you specifically want to talk to for some reason, grab them and talk to them. The leaders don't have to stay where they're at by any means. Alexa, can you find some music to put on in the background so you can not hear everybody's conversations? What I would ask of you guys is that unless you're having a conversation about this, to just not be talking. If you don't need to process something out loud, then spend some time journaling or spend some time praying. There is paper up here. If you feel like you want to take the step of writing to the person that's on your list, please feel free to do that. Whether you end up sending it or not, that's totally up to you. But that is a way to healthily get out some of the things that you might be thinking about. All right, I'm going to pray, and then this time is ours. Jesus, some of us in this room, and you know all of our stories, so you know this, but some of us in this room are having a hard time because we've got something directly on our minds. And maybe we're angry because we don't want to forgive, or maybe we're feeling convicted because we're supposed to, maybe we're confused, or maybe we're just emotional. Some of us are having those types of feelings and thoughts, God, and you know that because you know us. Jesus, some of us are thinking, I haven't been hurt super bad in my life. I'm not sure where I need to forgive or what I need to forgive, God. I just pray that you would call things to mind, maybe even just minor occurrences, Jesus, and simple acts of forgiveness that we can extend to people who may have hurt us in small ways, Jesus. Lord, I know this is not easy. I know that most of what's in us wants to rebel against this because we want human justice, Jesus. But I pray that in this room, your justice would reign true, that it would be more powerful than what we want, God. Lord, I pray for your Holy Spirit's comfort and wisdom and discernment and protection over this evening. Thank you for being a God who has chosen every single day to forgive us for the things that we've done as you call us to forgive others.